Council President, is it time to start?
We are started.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Welcome everybody to Safe and Healthy Committee meeting. Lori Kinnear, the chair. And we need to start out with approval of minutes. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Can I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, the ayes have it. We're going to go right into, I think, Council President, you wanted one thing pulled off the consent to discuss.
Yeah,
it was the
VirTra training.
VirTra upgrade. Do you want to do that now or do you want to do it at the end?
Let's do it at the end.
Okay, great. The next person on our agenda is Sergeant Sparing, Nate Sparing. We had a conversation a couple weeks ago. I learned a lot from talking to him about the K-9 program, and I suggested that he come once a month and just update us on number of contacts, give us information that currently we don't have. For this first meeting, I suggested that he introduce himself, give us some of his background so we can get acquainted and learn how he manages the K-9 unit. And I was, quite frankly, I was shocked at the amount of expertise he has and just heartened by a person who is very thoughtful and caring. So, Sergeant, are you on? Because I can't tell if you are on or not.
I am.
Oh, perfect. Do you want to go ahead and just give us a little overview of who you are, what your job entails, and then next month we can start with getting updates on the unit itself.
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity. I was born and raised in Spokane, graduated Gonzaga University in 1998, and was hired February of 98 with the Spokane Police Department and have been here ever since. Was promoted to sergeant about 3.5 years ago, and just over 1 year ago, the middle of July 2019, was appointed to the K-9 unit. My background in patrol and as a sergeant was the CIT coordinator. So I did a lot of de-escalation training the department in crisis intervention, to include the 40-hour-a-week course for multiple agencies and social workers, law enforcement, fire department, etc. And did a lot of training in motivational interview and assisted instructing there. So coming into the K-9 unit, had zero dog experience. Was never a K-9 handler, and so I don't bring that lens to it. I have obviously learned quite a bit in the last year because of the outstanding instructors and handlers around me, but have a very analytical view for use of force, especially in relation to obviously now K-9, just through my background in de-escalation, and that's kind of encompasses why I'm here. So a lot of the things that I do in reviewing every single deployment is constantly looking at, even if it was done right, is it done the best? Is there a different way to do it that is going to be even better outcome? And I'll give you a couple of examples of that. It's really common for our unit to have patrol set up a perimeter. So that would be cars around a several block area with lights going, and those cars are giving PA announcements regarding a K-9 being used to track. If we go from a building search, we do the same type of announcements, but we started to incorporate vehicles as well using the PA, so it's not just human voices yelling. It's also vehicles at the back of a building, the front of a building, putting lights on, making it really obvious who we are, because our goal is obviously no force be used and hopefully the person surrenders peacefully. So That's just one example. We're looking at our new body cameras as well versus the ones we're currently using to try to alleviate any potential. Some of the background on the current ones we're using are they have a slide button to turn them off, and that can get moved by a drone breeze. So trying to alleviate any possibility of that in our new devices. Don't have that feature, so it would be impossible to turn that off. So those are examples of some changes we're trying to make.
Okay, so we lost video on you. I'm assuming we still have audio. I'm wondering if we have any questions for the sergeant. And I can't see you, so just start talking.
And I am still here.
Are you there? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're cutting in and out. Does anybody have questions for Sergeant Spearing? I think it would be just so instructional for us just to get that different perspective, regardless of how we feel about use of canines or whether they're appropriate or not. Just more information is always best. So thank you. I appreciate that. Next month we'll have some update on how many times they were deployed and what the outcomes were. That'd be possible.
Will do.
Okay.
Yep, and I will have the year-to-date stats for you next month, and every month I will do a recap of the previous month. So you'll have fresh stats at the start of every month. That
would be perfect. Thank you so much, and thanks for coming.
Appreciate your time.
All right. Okay. Next up on the agenda is Mr. Crago. You're going to be giving us a COVID if you would like to, if you have one.
Of course. Afternoon, everyone. Good to see you. Kind of looking over the dashboards and the meetings that we have every week with Regional Health and all of our partners, as well as just the internal workings. Probably globally, I'd characterize things are difficult right now, but there's some signs for optimism. Specifically, as of the 31st of July, we hit some record numbers throughout July in terms of case counts per day. The greatest area demographically was in the 20 to 29-year-olds, which is also a little bit disturbing as well as different than our earlier trends. Hospitalizations are up. Currently, we have 42 people in our hospitals related to COVID. That is out of 1,900 staffed beds, but that is higher than it's been for quite some time. We continue to work very closely with the Regional Health District. They're outstanding partners. We've got a lot of formal contact points, and we have a lot of informal contact points. And depending on what's going on, one's more important than the other on any given day. There's definitely a desire and awareness by both Spokane, our staff, as well as the other partners to be very informed and stay very nimble and alert to any indicators that are going on. Good example of that is the administration met with a group of restaurant and bar owners who kind of also were watching the indicators. And in advance of the governor's orders, this group was ready to voluntarily go to a 10 o'clock cutoff for service for alcohol. They've started their own small ad campaign, kind of a, we believe in, masks, washing your hands, being very careful, to reassure restaurant goers that this restaurant in particular would meet the criteria for safe service. There's a real desire by, I think, a lot of members in the community not to go backwards, but to adjust. If we need to tweak some of our settings, I think the 10 o'clock curfew is a great example where rather than shutting down all restaurants, you simply adjust and just roll the dial back just enough if that's an area for concern. Parks continue to be a focus for people, both in terms of over-congregation and educational opportunities, and Garrett's working very closely with Dr. Lutz on additional things that can happen. I think another example, as you saw with Lime Scooter, we didn't ban Lime Scooter. We rolled back in a very common sense, rational, proportional way. Very good arrangement. Again, Lime's been great to work with as well, where the large areas where the scooters are being used as recreational fun opportunities and, again, congregating too many people at once, those have been dialed back, whereas the use of Lime scooters for commuters, one-on-one, where that actually is an advantage, that continues. We've also had a great after-action review by the City of Spokane staff on our COVID response from earlier in the year. Just a very candid, very honest, no bars were held at all, kind of evaluation of ourselves. What did we do well? What didn't we do well? What lessons have we learned? How do we memorialize that into our plan for the future? That went very well, and the Health District is undergoing their own self-evaluation as we speak. And some of you will probably be involved with that in terms of a survey shortly. Again, a lot of signs for optimism. More testing is going on. More contract tracers are coming on board. We've had Health District did a recent survey of mask usage, and Spokane was over 90% on the last survey that we took, which is very encouraging. And I think there's a lot of reasons for us to expect that things are going to look a little bit better in the future than they did in the past. And with that, I'll answer any questions you have.
Any questions for Mr. Craig?
Yes, Councilmember Cathcart.
Go ahead.
Yeah, hey, Wes, two questions. One, so the masking mandate's been in place for, I think, 4 weeks now? Has there been any commentary from the Health District that you know of as to when we're going to start to see some sort of positive impacts of that? I mean, the compliance rate seems to have been pretty high for the last 2 to 3 weeks. So wondering on that. And then also, you mentioned the word curfew. Is there an actual curfew in place, or are we just talking about limiting alcohol sales after 10 o'clock?
That was a misstatement on my part. Shouldn't have used the term curfew. Was the elimination of alcohol sales after 10 p.m.
Okay.
And no, there hasn't been any specific word from the Health District on whether or not the efficacy of masks can be seen. I think there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of variables to that equation. More testing equals more positives, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
I'll ask that tomorrow morning, though, Michael.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Craig? All righty. Thank you so much. Let's have Mr. Payne talk about...
Kimberly?
Yes.
Councilmember Mom has a question.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Candace.
We can't hear you, Candace.
We can't hear you. I can't see you either.
She's asking.
Is she?
I'm not a good lip reader. I can't help here.
Karen, do you know what the question is? Oh, employees. She's saying employees. What does that mean? Does that mean, do we have some? Yes, we have employees.
I assume okay.
Oh.
We continue to meet on a weekly basis on our, we call it Operation Homecoming, but what that looks like for everybody coming back in terms of kind of logging for contact tracing purposes, self-exam with temperature, rights of everyone to have that kind of safe, healthy workplace. I hate to overuse the phrase evolving situation, but the fact is that with the state, and as we learn more, it does change just a little bit. It seems almost on a weekly basis. Very engaged and very ready for phase 3 to take place. Met last week, both Amber and I, and actually a couple others from HR, met with some members of the street department, specifically the asphalt crew, who, when it's 90-plus degrees, are wearing a mask and around 350-degree asphalt. Really were having some concerns about both health and comfort. And so we're working with L&I to get clarification. It's mostly pretty common sense. When you feel overly hot, step away from others, take off your mask, breathe easily. See the question, modifications needed for work environment in preparation for phase 3. Looks like we're in a pretty good spot towards that. We've been ordering a lot of PPE that we needed. That doesn't appear to be a concern. HR's got a good set of the policies and new procedures. Again, so far, very common sense. We're going to try to still kind of work on the telecommuting where possible, where it's not physical separation in place, masks in place, and again, the health check as you enter the building every day.
Candace, does that answer your question? She says thank you.
Okay.
All right.
Once all that's been finalized, we will definitely get all of those documents out to everybody because it affects all of us.
Thank you, Wes. Any other questions for Mr. Crago? Okay, great. Thank you. Appreciate it. And now, Mr. Payne, you are going to update us on SPD, vehicle maintenance, I believe.
Yes, ma'am. I just want to check and see if Nathan Grove's on the line.
I did see him. I saw him.
Okay. I'm going to open it up, and then Nathan's going to go through the PowerPoint presentation that we loaded onto Fleet's SharePoint website that speaks to the cost per mile for the 12 patrol vehicles. But first, I have to apologize to this group. I inadvertently supplied Major Olson with some erroneous information that was kind of a shock and awe and was not intended to be a shock and awe. The query I ran, and I ran it twice before I gave the information to Major Olson, showed that we were spending $60,000 on patrol police vehicles after they hit 80,000 miles. The query was inadvertently pulling data in and duplicating it, which escalated that number. And to be honest with you, if you hadn't asked for the details of the information, I might not have discovered that for a while. So the ask was good, and I appreciate it. But I do want to emphasize the ownership for that error is on me. It's not on SPD. SPD was in no way, shape, or form trying to misrepresent anything. Neither was I, neither was Fleet Services. To that point, it took a while for me to get through and gather all this data because there is no one report that pulls all the information that I wanted to bring together to share with you on the details of those costs. That is also on Fleet SharePoint website, and I put a link to that in that email, a link to it to the email this morning, so you can open it up and you can look vehicle by vehicle and see the actual mileage, the cost incurred at that mileage from as of the data pull, which was I think April of this year, all the way back to the date the vehicle was put into service. Nathan is going to go through and show you a PowerPoint presentation on the 12 patrol cars that have over 80,000 and in some cases over 100,000 miles. So Nathan, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here, Dave. I'm ready to share my screen and get the presentation rolling.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. So this presentation is essentially looking at the vehicles over 100,000 miles, but I put the cost per mile into various subgroups, and those subgroups are 0 to 80,000 miles, 80,000 to 100,000 miles. 80,000 to 100,000 miles, 100,000 miles plus, which is here in the red. And then I created a fourth group, 80,000 miles to whatever the vehicle was at currently when we pulled the data. And I believe the data was pulled a couple of months ago, so we haven't updated this to July's data. And we currently have 12 SPD vehicles in the data file over 100,000 miles. So all of the graphs are going to essentially look the same in this presentation, but I kind of want to show you what we're working with here. The trend is that from 0 to 80,000 miles, you see a very low cost per mile when it comes to vehicle maintenance, most of the time that goes slightly up, actually, once the vehicle reaches 80,000 miles. And then the trend is that once a vehicle reaches 100,000 miles, the cost per mile to run that vehicle jumps up dramatically. And so another example here with the next vehicle, you can kind of see that dramatic shift, 0 to 80,000 miles. Each mile cost us to run the vehicle was only 8 cents per mile. And then it jumped up to 75 and 70 cents per mile once the vehicle was over 80,000 miles. And the trend continues in that fashion. You see a very low cost per mile for this first subgroup, 0 to 80,000, and then it skyrockets once we reach 80,000 and higher. And the reason I did these subgroups is just because that's when we saw the highest increase in cost per mile, and I grouped 80,000 to the current mileage just because when you're averaging, of course, when you're averaging over 80,000 miles, you're going to see a lower cost per mile just because there's 80,000 miles that you're averaging, which is why I chose to do a fourth group of 80K to the current mileage, because on that, we're averaging about over 40,000 miles, in between 30 and 40,000 miles. So just to show you the continued trend of the cost per mile, you can see that it increases once you reach 80,000, and then it increases again once you reach 100,000 miles. This here is an outlier. We saw for this vehicle here, obviously we saw a dip in between 80 and 100, but once again it increased once that vehicle reached 100,000 miles. And so that's really the trend. There's not really a whole lot I can go in depth in here on, just because all of them are pretty much the same as far as the trend goes. Do you guys have any questions?
Any questions?
Yeah,
Council?
Council President here.
Okay, lots of head shaking. Council President, you look like you're going to speak.
I'm trying to. So, yes, we were just trying to turn me on. I had a question on what maintenance includes. Does it include body work too? Because I know sometimes vehicles get into crashes. Or is it just the kind of what I would normal?
Nathan, I can take that one on.
Okay.
And thank you for asking that question, Council President Beggs, because that's what I was actually going to speak to now. These numbers exclude accidents. They exclude preventive maintenance. They exclude shop supply costs. These are strictly repairs and maintenance that are out of the ordinary and out of the norm. Mm-hmm. The actual cost of maintaining them is higher depending on the mileage because the PM frequency is increased. But no, there's no auto body damage. There are no shop supplies in there. This is strictly repairs needed.
That's great. And then I also had a question. These are all the same type of vehicle, or are these all different kinds of vehicles? Is there some?
No, sir. These are,
oh, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
No, you go.
These are strictly the police pursuit K8 vehicles,
right.
And these are from 2014 and 15, which are the ones that are hitting the 100,000 mile mark right now.
My question was: is there a particular suite of maintenance that you have to do at that? I know different vehicles have different times that you really have to do a total kind of overhaul, and I'm just wondering, is that part of the factor that's when the factory recommendation to do that type of, like a timing belt or something? I don't know enough about it. I just know there are a few things that hit at certain mileage where it's a big bill. No matter what kind of vehicle you have, it just hits at different mileages for different vehicles.
No, these are outside the typical maintenance mileage points. These are things like the suspension going bad. We've lost steering gearboxes. We've lost transmissions. I don't know that we've lost a complete motor, but we've had motor damage that's required us to pull half the motor apart and replace the top end on it. But it doesn't include timing belts or things like. Doesn't include brakes. Just
Oh, okay.
the wear and tear of the time.
Okay. Thanks.
Yes, I think that was pretty much everything. The other thing I would just point out to you real quick, a little piece of useless and data maybe, but there's 20 2014 K-8s in service right now and 15 2015s. And they're averaging about 32 to 40 hours of downtime each year for all the maintenance. So we're losing them basically a week out of every year for maintenance.
Okay.
Any other questions for Mr. Payne?
Not a question. I just had a request. At some point, I think you were going to come back to us with a report on alternative fuels. And then also, I saw Nathan shared with me police departments that are using electric vehicles. And it'd be great sometime to have a presentation on that, too. They're both super interesting to us. So.
Yes, sir. We're still working on the alternative fuels one. That's a project Nathan's ongoing with right now. I don't have an exact timeline for completion, but we'll try to get it to you in the next month or two.
All right.
And the electric vehicles, that's also part of that.
Yeah. Great. Thanks.
You're welcome, sir.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that update. And we're going to move on to Chief Meidel, who is going to talk about, wait a minute, don't tell me. He's going to talk about demographics of STD contacts.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I just want to give you a real quick 30,000 overview. We've hired Police Strategies Limited Liability. You may know Bob Scales through the Police Ombudsman's Use of Force dashboard. He also has a program where he will come into organizations and review the demographics of the contacts surrounding law enforcement agencies. He's done this nationwide. He works with a professor who's a doctor out of Seattle as well. So we're looking at a comprehensive review of about 2.5 to 3 years worth of our data. That was forwarded to him last month. So just wanted to, again, drop that seed. I anticipate, hope that we should have a report back from him in the next couple weeks. Once we get that report, we will obviously make sure we forward that to the council as well, but I didn't want you to be surprised when you see that report as well. So that should be coming forth in a couple weeks.
Any questions for Chief? This is a quiet group today. Right. Thank you.
Well,
Councilmember Burke, are you there?
Sorry, I thought you froze for a second. Okay, and you might have on my end because I did not hear that.
I turned off my air conditioning, so I'm not freezing.
Okay, there we go. Well, thank you. Yeah, so this is just a resolution to support partly to support Chief Meidel and some of his words and letters that he signed on to, but also to make sure that our community is safe with the trainings that our officers do. And we know that killology has been founded to be dangerous for community members. And so I want to thank Councilmember Kinnear for a lot of her input and Councilmember Beggs as well. And of course, Brian McClatchy for helping working on this. So yeah, open for discussion or comments if anyone has them.
Questions for Councilmember Burke? I can't see you, so you're just going to have to talk.
Hey, it's Karen. Just a quick question. I probably should know this, but hasn't all of that training that was scheduled for the community, hasn't that been canceled, or is there more coming?
So it's a little bit unclear to me. There was an article that came up that Councilmember Kinnear and I read that said that it was canceled, but then the article didn't actually say it was canceled, so we were a little confused. But we thought this would just be a good way to say we also stand in support with our chief who agreed not to bring it to Spokane to support him through this, just in case it ever comes back. And so it's just, yeah, it may have been canceled. We're not 100% sure, but there was an article about it. So.
Other questions? Comments? Suggestions? A really quiet group. Okay. Councilmember Burke, thank you. Appreciate your hard work on this.
Yes, thank you so much.
If you do have suggestions after this or questions, please let Councilmember Burke know so she can answer them for you. Thanks. All right, we are on to the next thing, and it is Council President and Maggie Yates presenting on the Guiding Principles Resolution. So take it away.
Yeah, I'll start us out. Over the last year, the county commissioners convened a community stakeholder group that included prosecutors and public defenders and law enforcement and mental health people and representatives from communities of color, judges, and it was mostly focused around trying to figure out what alternatives and answers there might be to our challenges with corrections, which is the word really for jail, given lots of complaints from all sides about how it is and isn't working. So we spent several months meeting together, and then at the culmination of that, we came up with some recommendations for the county commissioners. But because it's a regional approach, it also applies to the city. And one of the suites of recommendations was to adopt guiding principles and even thinking about jail and really criminal justice in general. And so these were published and in the news, and I just thought it would be helpful for us as a city to take a look at them and consider adopting them. And they were pretty strongly supported by the group. And so I invited Maggie Yates, who works for the city and the county, but she's stationed at the county. I assume they need the most help, so that's why she's there. But we all pay for Maggie's time as well. She's been a fabulous coordinator with no actual power, but huge influence in moving us forward. And so I just wanted to invite her to come talk about them. And we have a resolution that we would bring before the council in the future to also potentially adopt these guiding principles. I'll give it to you, Maggie.
Wonderful. Thank you for the background. I'm going to share, hopefully, my screen. I'm not familiar with Cisco as much. So give me one moment so I can share this presentation with you. And you need to do anything. Hopefully you can all see PowerPoint.
Maggie, you're actually cutting. You're cutting out quite a bit, yep. Maggie. If you want me to share my screen, that might help, and you can just tell me when to switch slides.
Perfect. Stop sharing. Hopefully you can pull that up. And I can call in. I'm still cutting out.
You're still
also stop my video.
Yeah, there we go. Try that. Yeah, try that.
All right, I'll call in. I'm not able to see the PowerPoint. Do you have it?
Here it is. It's up.
It's up.
Perfect.
So are you going to be calling in, Maggie? How are we going to do this?
Okay, I just called in. Hopefully this sounds better to the council.
Yes. So we've got the first paragraph, regional law justice guiding principles, so that's the title slide. Just let Hannah Lee know it's split.
Wonderful. Thank you for your patience, and thank you for the invitation to be here today. Council President Beggs did provide some helpful background, and I might go over some of that to provide context, but as he explained, I'm here to just share a little bit with you about the guiding principles that were recommended by the Justice Task Force. Hanley, you can switch to the next slide, which just provides a little bit of background information on the Justice Task Force. As Council President Beggs mentioned, it was initially authorized by the Board of County Commissioners back in 2019, actually. That's a typo, excuse me. And although it was something that was initially authorized by the county, it has been a regional effort and has included representation from the City of Spokane, the City of the Spokane Valley, representatives from all of the branches of government, including our courts, public defenders, prosecution. And it also helpfully included quite a bit of community participation, both representatives from the business community, public health and behavioral health organizations, and other community leaders. So there's quite a cross-section of perspectives and experiences around the table. Well, we met for about 4 times, actually, as a full group, and then had several other committee meetings. We also held several town halls, in addition to several focus groups with individuals who are currently incarcerated in the downtown and Geiger facilities. So with all of this qualitative and quantitative information that was supported and facilitated in part by the Vera Institute of Justice and the JFA Institute, we were able to crystallize a couple of different recommendations. One of them is sort of a portfolio of initiatives that were recommended for further development and investment. And then the second category of recommendations was these guiding principles. So, Hanley, you can go ahead and double-click, and we'll get to the next slide. Perfect. And before we go over the guiding principles that you should have in the circulated resolution, I think it's important to, understand them as a framework for our criminal justice decisions and investments. These were not intended to serve as goals or objections, but rather as aspirational values to, again, really help inform our decision-making process and investments related to our criminal courts and other criminal justice infrastructure. Go ahead, Hanley, if you don't mind. So the guiding principles are split into the next 2 slides, and these are how they were drafted in the resolution. There's some slight wording changes throughout to make it consistent, but then also the second principle in here was slightly redrafted in an attempt to better define what was originally conceived of by the Justice Task Force. I'm happy to read through them, happy to leave it up on the screen to let you read through at your own pace, and then we can switch to the next slide or answer any questions you have about these first 4 guiding principles. I will mention that...
Maggie, hi. Can I
hi.
pause you for a second? This is Councilwoman Munn.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, one of the things that I hear over and over is that we have not kept pace with technological communications with folks, and I would love to see something in here about maximizing our communications so we don't have so many failures to appear.
That's a great point. We did discuss failures to appear quite a bit, Councilmember Munn, during the Justice Task Force proceedings. As folks in this meeting know, they make up quite a bit of our court appearances or the court dockets, and then also individuals who are brought to the jail. We know that in the months between 2018 and 2019, about 24% of releases from the jail were solely for failure to appear. So clearly there's more we need to be doing to make sure that courts are accessible and that folks have the ability to appear and get those cases resolved.
And specifically, I love all the humane treatment and all of that, but I think an understanding that we need to keep pace with technology and we need to communicate on multiple platforms and attempts to communicate about when they're supposed to appear, why, and explaining to them what their requirements are. I think that's part of ensuring their rights and helping them understand how important it is for them to come.
Thank you. I did want to mention that the guiding principles were passed almost unanimously by the Justice Task Force 5 of the 7 principles passed unanimously, and then the other 2 passed with an overwhelming majority. So I just wanted to make sure the council was aware of that. So.
Which ones didn't pass unanimously? Can you tell us?
Sure. The second principle on this slide was originally drafted differently. It was drafted as we recognize that unnecessary pretrial incarceration actually undermines public safety. And that original wording reflects research that shows when you hold someone pretrial simply because they can't afford to pay their bail, that actually increases their likelihood of unemployment in the future and criminal activity. So understanding how destabilizing that experience can be in a way that comes back to harm public safety and community safety. The wording here, I believe Council President Beggs can speak to a little bit more, but it is an attempt to be a little bit more measurable in our language. And I should back up and mention that there was concern around the vagueness of what unnecessary meant at the time when the Justice Task Force endorsed these principles. And so to better define unnecessary, there's a reference to Court Rule 3.2, which guides those release decisions by the judicial officers. The second principle that received an overwhelming majority is the last principle. It's on the next slide. And that's in support of pursuing a criminal justice system that ensures racial equity and equity across all identities. Again, there were concerns about vagueness with this one, which I believe led to a couple of objections. But again, ultimately, this passed with an overwhelming majority.
Thank you.
Maggie, this is Councilmember Cathcart. Hey, on the and I know we've exchanged emails on this, but with regard to the last bullet, what are the laws that you're hoping will get changed? I guess I'm really struggling to wrap my head around this concept, and I really want to better understand it. And so, if you could maybe lay out some of the laws specifically that you want to see changed or that need to be modified, that might help me to better understand this.
I don't think at this point we have any particular laws sort of lined up in a queue that should be reconsidered, and we also recognize our sort of limited ability as local jurisdictions to shape and change those laws. However, we do have local policies and practices that can contribute to racial disparities and other disparities across the criminal justice system. And so part of what this, I'm sorry, go ahead.
What would those policies be? Like what are some examples?
Well, I think just speaking generally, we know that oftentimes racial identity and economic status go hand in hand, or at least there's an intersection there in that experience. So if we dig down into our data about failures to appear, for instance, or ability to pay bail, there may be data that exposes some racial disparities there. Now, I don't have that on hand, so I don't want to, I'm just trying to use some examples. So this principle really commits us to doing a deeper dive and a deeper analysis in terms of where those racial disparities begin to emerge, why that might be, and how we can address them. So is it because people of color disproportionately don't have access to cell phones, for instance, based on income? If that's the case, again, just a hypothetical, how can we better communicate with these individuals to let them know about their upcoming court dates if our text messages aren't reaching them, for instance? So that's just an example that we need to do a better job of understanding where and why those disparities are emerging and tailoring our policies accordingly.
So you're not suggesting then that there would be any sort of suggestion that, like, sentencing, for example, should be based upon skin color?
No, and the sentencing is something handled by the state legislature, so it wouldn't necessarily be for the city or county to weigh in on, but of course, you all, I know, have lobbying as well, but no, that's certainly not what we're suggesting here.
Okay, thank you.
Maggie, I just had an example of something locally.
Does council have any more questions for Maggie?
Councilmember Wilkerson here.
Go ahead.
So just follow up on that criminal justice disparities. We all like to think that Lady Justice is blind, but the disparity is economic. So when you have more financial resources, your outcomes are better in the judicial system. And so how can we truly level that playing field so money is not the contributing deciding factor of what the outcome will be?
Councilman
That's
Webster, could I just ask, though, would it make more sense then to commit to something on the socioeconomic side of things rather than just on the racial side of things?
I think that should be incorporated into it, absolutely. I think at this point, I don't know how we could separate the two because it's been so intertwined in our system. But I think going forward, as they do a deeper dive, I think we can start pulling that out.
Yeah, this is Council President.
I think.
Oh, go ahead. I was just going to.
Go ahead, Council President.
Sorry, I was just going to interject. So I just want to give an example. So the county and the city both offer some electronic home monitoring, which allows someone to come out of jail, be with their family, keep a job if they have one, keep going to school. But the county, when they do it, they charge the person for it, for whatever the cost is, which, in some ways seems fair. Okay, you're getting the benefit of that. But the city, my understanding, does not charge for it. And the challenge is, to the degree that we have racial disproportionality in income, it means more people of color under the county system will stay in jail, which will lead in turn to worse outcomes and more criminal behavior. So if you change that, it's not a race-based practice change, but we know that it disproportionately impacts people of color in Spokane. And the other example I wanted to just throw out there of something proactive they did in King County, they were having problems with defendants in juvenile matters showing up for court. And was particularly defendants of color weren't showing up for court. And so then they said, you know what, let's send them a letter. Let's send them a reminder letter. And they sent reminder letters, and the Caucasian defendants started showing up more, but it didn't get any better for communities of color. But then they contracted with the Boys and Girls Club to call each defendant, regardless of their race, and remind them, and then find out, did they need any help? Did they need protection? Communities of color, those defendants showed up in much higher numbers. A lot of them had been scared because of fear of gangs coming after them, but they had disregarded the letters from the court because they didn't trust the court, but they trusted the Boys and Girls Club as an emissary, and also everybody increased that. So that was a change that, again, wasn't a race-based change, but it was looking at the outcomes of race-neutral policies. And so that's really what racial equity is about. It's not doing things based on race, but it's changing neutral policies in a way that will lift all boats better.
Okay, so I'm going to have us move along because there are a few more items on the agenda. Are there any other questions for Maggie while she's here? Okay. Council President, you have the next. Thank you, Maggie, by the way. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you again for the opportunity.
Yeah, and if we need to get in touch with you, can we call you if we have questions later?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Council President, you have the next agenda item, which is updating council legislative agenda to include, emergency communication systems and facilities funding. 5 minutes.
Yes, so we are continuing to build our legislative agenda for the city for the 2021 session. And this is one issue that might be helpful for the city. Most of us are familiar with the agony of the Shrek system setting themselves up and getting our past mayor to lay off our dispatchers so that we couldn't keep our end of the contract, and all that that's going on. It's still a problem. But in trying to go upstream and figure out what part of the problem is, it looks like it's how the money is allocated. So the voters in Spokane County, including quite a few of them from City of Spokane, voted to increase our sales tax by 0.1% to fund our emergency communication system. But the county gets that money directly and decides what to do with it or not to do with it. And so I've spoken with some legislators about changing that for cities that are of a certain size or proportion of the county, so that the city would get its share, given that its residents are paying that tax. And then that would help facilitate really the county and the city sitting down and working out a fair agreement and a coordinated agreement. Because right now we're doing two different systems because we couldn't figure out how to keep our old system going together, which was a regional system, and we couldn't figure out how to protect our employees in the new separate one that they set up. So my proposal at another vote is, at a council meeting, is to add a bill that Marcus Riccelli proposed to our legislative agenda to pursue that, not just for us, but for all cities and counties across the state. And it's really an issue that is being discussed robustly at the Association of Washington Cities, not just for emergency services tax, but all these sales taxes. When the city is generating the income, it seems like they would get a proportional share and then have incentives for them to work together in collaboration with the county and perhaps even allow just certain benefits and incentives that way to do that, so that it's really an equitable arrangement. So this is just a first touch on that.
Okay. Questions for Council President?
Council President,
Yeah.
do you know what the proportional share of the current 1/10 would be for the city, and is that enough to fund our current emergency communication system?
Yeah, I think by population we're about 40%, and so, well, I don't actually. That's a great point. I don't know if it's by population or by revenue. If it was by revenue, it'd probably be a lot more. So I think we were looking at it by population, not by revenue, and yeah, it would more than fund us. But the real thing is it would make us work together with the county. Right now, they just take the money. Most of the money is sitting there, just kind of waiting, and until we reach an agreement, which is, we're well over a year under this new system, and the cost hasn't gone down for their members. The response times haven't been shown to be any better, and so we're just kind of at a stalemate. But I think if the legislature did this, we would quickly figure out an agreement on how to make it work.
Council President?
Go ahead.
I'm wondering if also by call, because many county residents, use our city and that sort of thing. And I know nights and weekends gets very busy, and maybe it's kind of by use too. I mean, let's think about that number of calls.
Yep, sure.
Any other questions for Council President? Thank you. Appreciate that update. Next on our agenda, Jacoby's going to brief us very quickly on our progress with wildfire vegetation management. You want to go ahead, Jacoby?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
And Lee, would you mind bringing up the PowerPoint there in City Hall? So Councilmember Kinnear and I have partnered with Chief Schaefer and the Parks Department to start a pilot project where we are going to use goats under the supervision of a shepherd to mitigate our fire vulnerability. This is a great picture of Chief Schaefer. Figured since he was gone today, it was a prime opportunity for me to share this with everybody. But the goal of this pilot project is to test the efficacy of goats as an environmentally friendly and cost-effective and safe alternative to both reducing our fire fuels and also our noxious weeds. So we've identified 3 undeveloped city parks where we are going to pilot this goat vegetative management project. And in 2020, that's just going to take place in Hangman Park. So, Hannalee, would you mind going to the next slide? That is actually Minnehaha. So I guess I'll walk through in each district, Minnehaha, then Hangman Park, which is right there. And the last one is Meadow Glen. in District 3, so one park in each district. In 2020, this year, since we're kind of past the main time to do this fire fuel mitigation, we're going to just focus on Hangman, and we're going to create a fire break by some of the residential communities there that abut the park. So it's just kind of an opportunity this year to dip our toe in the water and start doing some of that community outreach so that the citizens know kind of what we're doing, why we're doing it, and can get to know the goats. So, any questions?
Jacoby, it's my understanding that the provider is the one who suggested we do Hangman first. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
So goats were used or came to prominence in the news last year for protecting the Reagan Library from a wildfire. And they did that through targeted grazing that created an area around the library where the fine fuels and brush had been reduced and provided that fuel break, which made it easier for firefighters to save the building. And so we're going to kind of use that same method. This was a prime opportunity to use that same method around Hangman Park. And it was a more limited scope project that we could accomplish in our limited window this year.
Hey, Jacoby, it's Karen.
Hi.
So my question is, how do we ensure that the goats stay and that people aren't trying to take them? Is there somebody that keeps an eye on them, or?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. So we're partnering with a group called Healing Hooves, and that's our shepherd. So he will be in charge of setting up an electric fence and monitoring the goats and doing that kind of partnering with us to do that citizen outreach to know, don't get too close to that fence, watch your kids when you're around them, but very open to having people come by and say hello. But he will manage the goats 24/7 when they're out there and move them along as he sees fit, depending on what they're grazing and where they're grazing.
That sounds like a fabulous job. Thank you.
Doesn't it?
It does.
Any other questions for Jacoby?
Yes, Jacoby, Betsy here.
Betsy.
On the average, how much time do they spend in a location?
I believe so. This year they're going to be in Hangman Park for a 7-day period in late September to early October. We're not quite sure about the specific date yet, but that's for 5 acres of land. Generally speaking, as we go forward into 2021 on all 3 locations, there will be about 2 grazing periods per location of about 7 days. So about 2 weeks total on each location. So 6 weeks throughout the city, about.
And my understanding is it's time to when the vegetation is in a certain growth period so that it's attractive to the goats to eat it. Is that right?
That's correct. And also so that over a couple of years we will start to see long-term positive effects of reducing those noxious weeds from coming up in the first place. So getting them before they seed at different periods of the year.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you. Any other questions for Jacoby? All righty. Council President, you wanted to take one consent item off the agenda. Do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I just wanted to... Oh.
We can't hear you.
I know.
There we go.
Hannah Lee has figured out how to keep me quiet until she lets me talk, so which is a good skill to have. But I just wanted to comment briefly on the Vertra upgrade. We at study session saw some demonstrations and learned a lot from the officers who do the training that they had a concern that most of our current library of training simulations was a shoot, don't shoot situation, which is not really the majority of what our officers are dealing with, and isn't as flexible with de-escalation. So I just, after watching that example that they did and hearing that, I thought it would be a really good idea for us to pass along with that when we get to that point of the contract, getting some type of community advisory group, especially of people who are impacted by policing, to help figure out which training scenarios would be most helpful and which might be problematic from a community member perspective. Not that it would be binding on the police, but just give them that feedback on the front end before they start training people on it. So I just wanted to throw that out for consideration. I know the contract's going to be coming up, I'm assuming. I heard they want to do something. And then the second was whether or not we could use the forfeiture funds for that. That seems like a good use of the forfeiture funds. So just wanted to throw that out there.
Thank you. Any questions for Council President? Okay. So you had one other item that you were going to talk about?
Oh, yes. I was going to mention we've been working for a while on the city attorney charter amendment potential change, and we've circulated some drafts. I sent everyone an email just an hour ago. But the Councilmember Kinnear and some other people have expressed some interest in delaying this somewhat. Not tonight is the deadline, literally, to get it on this November's ballot. And so we got some feedback from the administration of some things that might work better for them if we could talk about it, and so that we might put it on the 2021 ballot. We could still vote to do that in the next few weeks while it's fresh in our mind and we have some momentum on it, but we could adjust it to make sure we're getting what we want, which was the idea was to get more independence and power for the city attorney, not to really take anything away from the mayor in favor of the council in doing that. So the new draft reflects that approach a little better, but since time is so short, and I think people will probably want an opportunity to weigh in, even though eventually it'd be a public vote, so people would truly get to weigh in. But I just wanted to share that out there. Happy to talk to people between now and 3:30. Just give me a call or text.
Any questions for Council President? Okay. Our agenda is complete. So we are going to adjourn. I want to thank everybody for attending. Our next meeting is August 31st. So we had 2 August meetings, but if we waited till September, we will run right into Labor Day. So we will see you all at the 3:30, and we'll see you at the next Safe and Healthy August 31st. Thank you all.